Thanks, Martine, for those words of introduction. Good evening. It's so nice to have you all here. And it's my pleasure and privilege to be able to moderate the panel discussion and Q&A portion of tonight's program. We have a distinguished panel of presenters, as you've gotten a taste of so far, and they'll be able to share some informative, compelling, and insightful information with us. But before we do that, before I introduce them, we have a few housekeeping issues. First of all of you who are sitting along the side waiting patiently, if you'd like to fill in some of the empty seats that we have at the various tables, that would be great. You're welcome to do that. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on the question and answer process. There should be index cards on everyone's table. So at any time while the panelists are speaking or shortly after we do that, feel free to write down any questions you have on there. And then if you just want to raise your card in the air, we'll have some runners coming around to be able to pick up those cards so we can keep that process moving. You are welcome to ask your questions anonymously. You can also ask a question if you'd like some more information. There's a very strong chance that we might not be able to get to all of your questions. So if you'll give us your name and either a phone number or an email, we'll be able to get back to you and do our best to get that information to you. You can also ask the question generally of our panel, or you can specify to whom you'd like the question to be directed. Following the question and answer process, as Miles mentioned, we'll have about 15 minutes for you to stretch, and then another opportunity to visit with all the wonderful community resources we have here. So, I think that takes care of the housekeeping. Now it is my pleasure to introduce to you our distinguished panelists. Also, in the interest of time, we do have detailed information about each panelist in your program on pages 2 and 3, so if you want to follow along there. On my far left is Mr. Larry Abrahamson. He is the Larimer County District Attorney. Next to Larry is Mr. Beau Ballinger, and he's a Senior Program Specialist with AARP Foundation and AARP Elder Watch. Next to Beau is Mr. Ted Beckman, and he is Division Chief and Community Paramedic Program Coordinator, let's all say that together 5 times fast, for Poudre Valley Hospital. Then on my immediate left is Ms. Lori Metz, and she is head of Larimer County Adult Protection Services. And next to Lori is Ms. Susan Vance, and she's the Crime Prevention Specialist for the Fort Collins Police Department. So with that, we're going to begin with Mr. Larry Abrahamson.
Thank you all for being here. It's really a pleasure of mine to be here and talk to you about some of these issues and perhaps be able to answer some of your questions. There's some great tables around here, and just browsing through some of the resources that is available in our community, it's really amazing. Now you'll notice the table number 18 over here, it says District Attorney, there's nothing on that table. Now, generally, we don't advertise our job since we're prosecutors, but we do have a website, and if you do want information on the District Attorney's Office or have anything that you want to report to us, it's easy to contact us. Our phone number is easily accessible in the phone book, and also we do have a website at larimercounty.org, and just Google that and get information on our office. Elder abuse is really something that I think that we're going to be emphasizing more and more as a society. And the reason for that is our population is getting older. The baby boomers now are getting to the retirement age, and we're going to see a significant increase in people who are at an age where they become more and more vulnerable to those who want to take advantage of them. The elder abuse problem, a lot of times the stereotype elder abuse is an elderly person being beat up as they walk down the street or taken advantage of in some physical way. Generally, that's not the type of elder abuse that we see. Most of our elder abuse is financial, and most of it is a result of a family member. In looking at statistics, there are 3 out of 4 elder abuse reports are as a result of some family member abusing the elder person. And just some more statistics, 75% of them are women, and the average age is about 78. So when you look at elder abuse, you have to look at many different facets of it. Generally speaking, the elder population who are retired A lot of them are on fixed incomes. Some of them have significant wealth and assets they've built up during their working life. And so they become an easy target for many people. We had an incident not too long ago where a man came in, and he was known to us. He worked in the court system, but he was now elderly, and he didn't have a lot of means, but he was living relatively comfortably. But he was contacted by a person who asked, basically told him that he had won a lottery, significant amount of money. And this guy thought, man alive, my ship has finally come in. You know, this is going to be, I'm going to be set for life. And they worked with him for a while and got his trust, which they generally do. And they told him that they would be sending him a check. And in order to help process the check, he would be getting a certain amount, and he was to deposit it in his bank account. And then he was to write a check back to them for a small administrative fee. Well, he did this on several occasions. Well, guess what happens? Their check was no good. His check was. And after making several promises and several checks, all of a sudden he was out several $1,000s. And he didn't know what to do. I mean, he was confused. He was mad at himself for getting himself in this situation, and he was really beside himself. So he came and he was talking to us, and we were able to get his bank account frozen, so he couldn't. Nobody could take any more money out of his account. We were able to get a hold of a family friend and or a family member who could help him and kind of keep track of his finances and so forth, so he wouldn't fall into this situation again. But there wasn't really anything we could do as far as prosecuting. Most of the transactions were Western Union, and so we were kind of at a dead end as to where to go with this. The only thing we could do is stop the bleeding, so to speak. And but he was probably out that amount of money. But this is the type of thing that we see on a regular basis and try to deal with. Some of them we can help, some of them we can't. One of the things that I think that is important, and I'm glad to see Representatives Fisher and Cafalas here, because there's one thing that I think that we can do as far as the legislature, and that's look at mandatory reporting laws for elderly. There are only 4 states in the United States that do not have mandatory reporting laws. Colorado is one of them. So I think that is something that we could look at and really help our system out. I'm getting the cards flashed at me here. It says wind up what you're talking about. I'll be happy to answer questions as we get to the Q&A portion of this about some of the things that we do and some of the things we can and can't do as it relates to elder abuse. But thank you very much for your attention to being here.
Great, thank you, Larry. And next is Beau Ballinger.
Thank you, Karen. Can you all hear me in the back? All right, good. So I am not a Colorado native, but my grandfather actually graduated from CSU in 1943. So I have a special connection to the Fort Collins community. And so I appreciate you all allowing me to be here today. It was a beautiful drive up from Denver. So I work for the AARP Foundation. We are the charitable arm of the AARP family, and our work focuses on older, lower income adults. We focus in 4 areas, and that's hunger, housing, isolation, and income. The program that I in particular work on is called the AARP Elder Watch program. It's a program that, is anyone here familiar with that? Have you ever heard of the Elder Watch program? Okay, a handful of people, that's good. It's a statewide program, and it was, it began 11 years ago in 2001 under then Attorney General Ken Salazar, and it has continued for the last 11 years and has strong support from the current Attorney General John Suthers. It is a program that is really designed to be a resource for folks as they reach out for help. Our mission is to make sure that no older person suffers in silence or alone at the hands of someone who would exploit them financially. So our focus as well is on financial exploitation. Unfortunately, there are a lot of challenges that come along with financial exploitation. As has been previously mentioned, there's not necessarily physical notifications when someone is being abused financially. And a lot of the abuse comes from family, friends, close acquaintances. We had a similar call. Basically, the way that our program works is there's a local and a toll-free number that anyone can call into if it's actually connected to the Attorney General's office. But you call in, you hit option 2, you're connected to the AARP Elder Watch office. We are almost entirely volunteer run. We have an amazing group of volunteers. I imagine a lot of you volunteer as well in your own areas of interest. But we could not do this program without the volunteers that we have. Most of our volunteers are in their 70s. They're retired professionals, retired lawyers, retired educators, and it's really important to us that we have them volunteering to answer the phones, because there's a lot to be said about peer-to-peer interaction when it comes to abuse. We find that by interacting with a peer, people are more willing to share their story and are more receptive to learning things. I think a lot of research shows that when we're talking to someone that we perceive to be similar to us, we do feel more comfortable. We're probably more willing to kind of interact on that level. As has been stated, and as you know from your handouts, financial elder abuse is vastly underreported. They estimate that of every reported case, there's 5 cases that go unreported. Last year in 2011, in our database, we had over 4,500 calls from around the state who came in with various issues. We had over 800 interventions, what we would like to call interventions, where we helped educate people on red flags and prevented them from taking an action that would lead to falling victim to scam. Unfortunately, prior to my joining the program, we had a similar case with a foreign lottery scenario where a very, very sharp fellow, he was a retired Air Force pilot, fell victim to a very similar scam. But in this case, he lost quite a bit of money because the scammers came back around claiming to be the FBI at a later time and demanding more money to research his case. And while that may seem shocking to us that someone would continue to fall victim to that, it's very, very common. In his case, unfortunately, he lost about $200,000 and lost his home. On the flip side of that, we have had a lot of callers call in who have recognized the red flags and have taken action to report those and refuse the offer, refuse the scam. So it's not all bad, but it is a serious reality out there. I think, in the work that we do, we are incredibly passionate about education. I think that's a huge preventive measure that we can take, is because we were asked about the different trends we see in scams. We get calls every single day. They range from old standard scams that are just recycled and find new victims to new scams that are technology related. As technology advances, I think we'll see more of those. But I think for us, our main goal is to help people recognize, refuse, and report. And that's our 3 simple R's. That's what we want people to do: recognize, refuse, and report. That's why we have that hotline there. We know that people feel ashamed, they feel embarrassed, they may not want to talk to their loved ones, but that's why we have this hotline there so that people can call in anonymously if they'd like to. And our goal is really to get people to the point of being willing to take some time, don't make a rash decision, don't panic, talk to people, and frankly, with us, if you call the hotline, that's a great step in our opinion. Anything we can do to get people to prevent it on the front end, because as we know, we have a difficult time returning their money on the other end of that.
Wonderful, thanks, Beau. And now we'll hear from Ted Beckman.
Beau made sure that everyone could hear in the back, and I want to make sure the glare is okay.
Do you want me to tone down that light?
So thank you very much for having me and for putting on this forum of such an important topic. I just want to speak a little bit to EMS, Emergency Medical Services. We have a unique opportunity to go into people's homes, and we do not need a warrant or even a formal invitation. All you have to do is call our hotline number, which is 911, and you will have a house full of strangers before you know it. We respond to all kinds of things: nosebleeds and falls, and cardiac-related issues, and abdominal pain. and anything to help with the patients or caregivers or their families with any immediate health concern. We act as health detectives to formulate a plan and determine a diagnosis, provide some treatment, and assist patients in any way that we can make them feel better, to provide them with the proper resources to make sure they're successful in the long term. And then we provide transportation for them to get to definitive care to the hospital and to the physicians. During our investigations, however, at a scene of a call, we can run into stories that conflict. We run into caregivers that have two sides of the story which don't really jive with what we're finding as a medical complaint for a patient. One call that comes to mind is a call for a head injury. The way the call comes in is through a 911 dispatcher. The 911 dispatcher then asks important questions like address and date of birth and those types of things of the reporting party, and it comes across our dispatch terminal in our ambulance. When we read this information, we notice that there's some vagueness to the reporting. It's not really complete, and just some clues initially prompt us to possibly send the police department to go to the scene as well. When we first arrive on scene, the mistreatment starts before we even get there. We're watching the reporting party motion us to the back of the room where the patient is with a hand while they're busy watching TV and interacting in their own self-indulgence. And that's kind of the first clue that something just isn't right, and that's where our detective work kind of starts. We arrive at the patient's room and find the patient's room in disarray. Very sterile environment, no pictures on the wall, no personal touches, no fresh air, nothing that you would expect. Kind of like a prison cell, if you will. That paints a picture. After assessing the patient, we determined that the injuries were not consistent with what the caregiver said. They said they rolled out of bed when, as a matter of fact, it looked very, very suspicious, and not just from a simple roll out of bed. And our question to the caregiver was, how did they get back into the bed? And we were given a shoulder shrug with an I don't know, and the verbal interaction ended at that point with the caregiver. We assumed at that point that they knew where we were going with our investigation, and we did what we do best, and that's just take care of the patient and their chief complaints. We take them to the hospital and report what we find on the scene of an emergency call to the physicians and to the nursing staff at the emergency room. That continuum of care is very important for us in the reporting process. One thing that is unfortunate is elder abuse is not, we don't have a mandatory reporting component, but our paramedics have a high moral and ethical standard where they report these cases. We probably over-report, which is good because you can investigate every little claim that might come in. It might seem small, but for us, our paramedics are very good at assessing injuries and complaints. One thing that we're doing to change our culture and to start prevention is the community paramedic program, where we allow caregivers and family to request our service, that we come into the patient's home and take their blood pressure, make sure their medicines are all in order, provide a fall and risk assessment, and give those caregivers kind of a break, kind of a big relief, a sigh of relief that someone is there to take care of their loved one, and we get to come into their home and make sure that they're okay and safe. I think that one thing that we can change for sure is our paramedic training. Our initial training is based on immediate life threats, and we don't get trained in counseling or social work or anything like that, and we spend 95% of our time dealing with those issues. So we can look at ourselves and our own industry and change the education requirements. The other big thing is more of a robust reporting system, where we know that there's some feedback to us that we've reported this case, and some feedback of what happens in that continuum of care. And then lastly is the requirement that there is a mandatory reporting in the state of Colorado. I think that's imperative. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Deb. And I just wanted to send out a gentle reminder that you do have those index cards on your table. If you're thinking of questions, please feel free to write those down and put those in the air. And next we'll be hearing from Lori Metz.
Okay. There it is. I just want to make sure everybody can hear me. And again, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I want to start off by just echoing my previous panelists' concerns and awareness for everyone to know that we are not a mandated reporting state. I actually just learned, Larry, that we're actually one of 3 now. South Dakota just passed mandated reporting. So it is Colorado, North Dakota, and New York right now that do not have mandated reporting in this country. So I have been attending some elder abuse task force meetings at the state level, which came out of Senate Bill 78, which was some legislative changes from this previous session. And part of that task force is to study what mandated reporting would look like, should look like, and what that impact would be. Regarding the fiscal note, which is always the concern of our legislators. So those recommendations have been compiled and will be put forth during the next session. So we'll see what happens from this point on. So with adult protection, just because we're not mandated reporting doesn't mean that our community here in Larimer County is not extremely well advised. We receive approximately between 800 and 850 reports every year just here in Larimer County. We generate almost 10% of the reports for the entire state. So I think that speaks well to our community, that they are aware of their neighbors, they care for their neighbors, and they want to reach out and help, even if they don't know what to do. In regards to those approximately 800 referrals, about half of them are screened as being appropriate for adult protection to assign a caseworker to it. And a lot of our detailed information as to kind of what happens after a report is made and the types of things that we are responding to is at our resource table right over here. So please feel free to come get more information. I don't want to bore you all with numbers. So we have 5 caseworkers that cover the entire county. And that's in relation to, from a child protection standpoint where there's, closer to about 80. So that just kind of shows you where we're standing with all of that right now. I have 5 very dedicated individuals. I haven't had an opening in almost 5 years. So, and I've had somebody with me for 17. So these are people who are passionate about what they do and are extremely resourceful. A great example of this is that we are currently working with a woman here in the county who's in her 80s. We call her Connie, and we have been trying to engage Connie in services for about 3 months now. Because we do work with adults, that means they have the right to refuse our services. So a lot of finessing goes into trying to get clients to engage with us and let that caseworker in the door and continue to accept those services. And it took about 4 months for Connie to let us in the door, but that didn't stop my caseworker. She went out every month to see her. Finally, one day we had a break and a neighbor saw my caseworker leaving with a badge and called our hotline to see if somebody was going out to visit Connie, and we finally had our first break. And that neighbor was able to then provide us with a brother's name in Kentucky. And we called her brother, and he was so thankful that someone was making that connection. He was then able to tell his sister that we were going to use his name as a password, and she let us right in as soon as she knew that we were somebody that she could trust. Connie's home is quite cluttered. She is self-neglecting at this point due to both some kind of emotional things and because of some physical things. She does have some mobility issues that she's just not able to do a lot of things. She lives in a 3rd floor condo, which is very, very difficult for her to get groceries, things like that. So we've been able to, with her brother's massive assistance, been able to bring in some help with some folks in the community that will help her sort through her items, those kinds of things. She is now very attached to her caseworker and calls her nearly daily just to kind of check in and those kinds of things. But what we are seeing with her is what we commonly see with older adults is just a huge level of isolation. And sometimes that is by choice. You know, there are some rural portions of our county that people move out to have that space between them and everybody else. And then there are people who are isolated simply because of mobility issues or, you know, other kinds of things going on in their life. So I think that, you know, being able to engage folks and call whenever you have a concern, and, you know, Ted said something about over-reporting, and that's not that's not a concern at all. You know, about half of the calls we get, like I said, are what we just call information and referral, where we're calling back that person and saying, you know, your mom lives here and you live in Vermont, you know, let me give you the guide that's going to tell you what the assisted livings are here in Larimer County. So it's a lot of that sort of thing. And so, and we find that to be the biggest portion of our job, is just educating the people here in our community who truly do care, because we get a lot of good phone calls. So please feel free at the breaks and portions to come over and chat with me. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Lori. And our final speaker is Susan Vance.
Hi, everyone. A lot of you know me. You've seen me out in the community over the years. I am the crime prevention specialist, and I talk in the community. I'm just out there all the time. And I really enjoy talking about prevention. I've been a police officer since 1974. I'm not a sworn officer anymore. I've got too much titanium in me to be a cop. But that's okay. I can share my experiences with people now. And I love prevention because prevention, and you'll see this, I think, in the program, is so much easier than picking up the pieces afterwards, after something bad has happened. Preventing crime, preventing falls, preventing illnesses, preventing anything is so much easier. And I've been asked to talk about some incidences that might fit the criteria, and I just don't have enough time. 6 minutes? Are you kidding? But I'll try to talk about a few cases that I've experienced over the years. One of them is a grandmother who received a call from her credit card company that there was a large purchase one day on her credit card at some stores that she probably doesn't go shop at. You know, stores where maybe teenagers go to, and lots of expenses for food. And so she called the police, and right away the police investigated, and they found out that a young lady was using her credit card. And they showed a picture to this woman, and of course immediately she recognized that it was her granddaughter that had appropriated her card. Well, unfortunately, the grandmother didn't want to prosecute. And the sad thing is, this is very common when it's found out that it's a family member that is stealing from them. And the thing is, I don't want to get her in trouble. Well, the thing is that the granddaughter did not have a conscience as to what she was doing to her own family member. And this is really hard for law enforcement when we have these types of cases, because the granddaughter needs to learn that this isn't right. She will do it again. There was no consequence for her. And so it was hard for us to walk away from the case and let it be dealt with the grandmother, who really didn't want to do much more than a slap on the wrist. She was going to take care of it, which means that she was going to pay for it. The granddaughter had no consequence, didn't have to pay the grandmother back. This is hard for law enforcement. That's one of these cases that we have where there was nothing else done other than that. We see this too often. Lots of times it doesn't even get reported to us, and it's just maintained or taken care of with the family. Another incident was reported to me just a few weeks ago, and again, this is very common, where we'll see an elderly person that is isolated from family and friends, isolated from contact, because of where they've chosen to live, communication. This person actually was living in New Mexico, retired in a remote area because they liked the area, it was beautiful. But there was a group of people who befriended him, and gained his confidence, thus the term con gain, you've heard that term, to the point of where they did things that confused him easily. And the next thing he knew, they had power of attorney for his everything, for all of his personal businesses. Eventually he was able to move out of the area, but he had lost most of his money, his property, and everything. He moved here to Larimer County and did befriend somebody here who was law-abiding and trustworthy, who related the story to me. I was able to get him in touch with the district attorney's office, who was able to put him in touch with some of the appropriate authorities to deal with it. But the thing is that this went on for a year and a half in New Mexico, and so he was devastated financially. Very, very common. And again, it's the group of people that will prey upon people, and they live in isolated areas. So it's kind of a cultish thing, and it happens quite often. And it's so sad to see this happen, but lots of times we do see it happen, and we're not sure what to do about it. Again, we're going to be talking about education and communication, and they're very, very important tools, because that helps to teach us what to do when we become privy to what is going on around us. Sometimes we hear of things and we don't want to get involved. We need to get involved, because that's the only way we're going to make changes, positive changes. Sometimes it might not quite be what we think it is. I had a call the other day from a woman who said that a woman was being abused by her mother, an adult woman being abused by her mother. Well, I referred her to adult protection. She didn't want law enforcement to be involved. But at least she got the ball rolling by talking to me, and we get some positive intervention going on. So that's what you need to do, is the communication. I'm available for education, and I will talk to groups, and I talk about frauds and scams, neighborhood watch, personal safety, you name it, I'll talk about it. And I'm just more than happy to get the word out to people, young and old. So know that the resources are available to you out there, or maybe you have friends or groups of people that are interested. I have a table back there with lots and lots of information for you, so please come visit me during the breaks. Thank you very much for being here. I'm very happy to see so many people there. It's a great thing. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Susan. Okay, and now we're going to begin the Q&A process. Oh. Okay, I'm going to do my best to get to... There's not too many repeats. Okay, great. Thanks, Martine. So I'm going to do my best to kind of go through these questions. We have some people coming around to collect more. So, and depending upon who it's directed to, we'll kind of go from there. So the first one looks like it says, Laura somewhat answered it, so we'll go, is anyone working on getting mandatory reporting laws put forth?
There it is. I can, like I said earlier, so the Elder Abuse Task Force was something that did come out of Senate Bill 78 during this most recent legislative session. And I can just give you a small snapshot of who is part of that task force. It is the state APS office, and there is the DA's office from Jefferson County, and several other elder law attorneys from the Denver area. AARP Elder Watch is there, Hospice and Palliative Care of Denver is there, several different community organizations, the National Association of Social Workers, the folks that represent home health agencies, the folks that represent nursing homes, those kinds of agencies that would be most affected by mandated reporting. So I think that what the task force has come up with is that, yes, it needs to happen. How it would kind of go about would have to be obviously worked out at the county level, but that there also needs to be funding behind it, because if there's no funding behind it from the legislation, a report is just a report, and that here at the local level, we wouldn't be able to provide an appropriate level of service.
Thanks. Thank you, Lori. And the follow-up is, why do we not have it? So it sounds like funding is part of it? Big part?
There was another question of explaining what it actually is, too. Some people are unclear on that.
So
I can speak to the mandated reporting just very briefly. So as with child abuse is a perfect example. So with in volume 7, which is the legislative code when it comes to child abuse, there's a list of professionals in the community that are mandated to report suspected child abuse. School teachers, social workers, medical professionals, daycare providers, those kinds of things. And with adult abuse right now, there's only a list of professionals that are urged to report. So the move is to hopefully make those folks that are now urged to mandated to report.
Wonderful. Okay, I think we got all that. Next question. That's fine. And this is directed toward any of the panelists. What strategies are available for self-neglect and isolation? Any panelists like to take that one? Thank you, Lori.
Well, with self-neglect is a huge percentage of what we deal with. Over 50% of our reports deal with self-neglect, and sometimes in conjunction with other forms of maltreatment. And I'm sorry, what was the first part?
Isolation.
Oh, and isolation. And isolation. I think Susan can probably speak to this too. It's just intervention, outreach, prevention, those kinds of things. We do have some communities here that would maybe consider be isolated by those of us who live here in town. But I mean, we have some pretty wonderful sheriff's deputies that know those rural areas like the back of their hand, and we rely on them very heavily. So I think making those kinds of connections with those people in those communities, is kind of what helps us out quite a bit there. So, but the isolation it's difficult. It's very, very difficult.
Susan, did you want to add something?
I will. Okay, there it is. In my alternate life on the weekends, I'm up in Crystal Lakes, which is up by Red Feathers. And there are a lot of older folks up there retired. And I'll tell you, that would be a good place to be isolated, but we don't let people be isolated up there. We have a lot of social interaction. We've got a lot of groups that interact, volunteer. Man, I'll tell you, I even volunteer at the restaurant as a waitress. But you mentioned the rural deputies, and they know everybody up there, and they check on everybody up there. And it's a very important service. And so I just want you to keep that in mind. Just planting to see. But it's very important with the rural areas because that is a place where anybody, whether they're senior or younger, can deteriorate if they're not taken care of. So I just wanted to add that. I want to keep it on to you.
Wonderful. Anyone else? Yes, please, Ted.
The community paramedic program was originally developed for rural departments or rural parts of actually in Nova Scotia and Canada as well as in Minnesota. So that's where it was originally intended, was for people that didn't have access to health care. They had paramedics in their local jurisdictions that would go and make sure that they were healthy and cared for and didn't have any health concerns while they were in their home. So that's one place where we can go in Larimer County and be useful to people in their home as well.
Great, thank you. These next two questions go a little bit hand in hand, so I'll read both of them and then whoever would like to take it. If there's a question or a concern, who do we call first? 911 or AARP hotline or PVH EMT Aspen Club or City Attorney's Office? And then if we do call for EMT or 911, do we have to pay for ambulance, etc., if the insurance company won't pay? So anybody want to?
I'll start real quick. And this is a general 911 response. If you think it's an emergency, if you feel in your heart it's an emergency, you're not even sure what's going on, dial 911. We'll figure it out on the other end. Okay? So don't ever hesitate on 911, and I'll let you take the rest of it from there.
Yeah, I was just going to echo what you said. If you ever are in danger, there's any safety issues, definitely call 911. The way that the AARP Elder Watch hotline works is that it's a referral service in essence, and we will take the time, if you have the time, if it's an issue that you have questions about, to actually walk through it. Our volunteers are really good at asking the right questions. A lot of times callers will come in with a quick version of what has happened, but it's not necessarily the complete story. They may be distraught, they may be upset, and so our volunteers are really good at sort of, okay, what is really happening here, and then where would be the most appropriate place to refer you to, whether that's legal help, whether that's your local district attorney, you know, whatever that case might be. So I think I would echo that as well.
Okay, and then that second question, if you do call EMT or 911, do we have to pay for the ambulance if the insurance company doesn't pay? Does anyone have an answer for that, or?
I think that's me.
Okay, Ken.
I am far from a insurance billing specialist, which I'm glad to announce. In northern Larimer County, where PVH EMS would respond to a 911 call, if we come to your home and do an evaluation, there's no charge for us to come out there. If we transport, there is a charge, which, like I said, I'm not an insurance expert to say what would be covered and what wouldn't be covered, but 9.99 times out of 10 insurance companies, if you're insured, will pay for that, or Medicare or Medicaid. Or any other provider will pay for an ambulance ride to the hospital in an emergency situation. So for an evaluation, northern Larimer County, there's no charge for us to come out and do an assessment. So.
Great, thank you, Ted. Our next question, if I report a family friend of financially abusing her mother, and Larry, I'm looking down your way. I think this may be your area. Is she subject to legal charges if she's found guilty, i.e. felony or misdemeanor charges?
If the person, I'm not sure quite I understand the question, if the person reporting the incident is...
It looks like if I report a family friend for financially abusing her mother, would that family friend be subject to legal charges if she's found guilty?
Well, she could be, depending on the circumstances. For example, in the example I think that was given here before, where a family member, and like I said, that 3 out of 4 financial abuse situations occur because of a family member. So if someone says, I think a family member might be abusing another person in the family, and that's investigated and found out that that in fact is true, yes, charges could be brought against that person. Now, there's a whole other number of other things that could happen also, but generally, if they are stealing from someone, whether it's a family member or not, why, they're subject to being charged with a theft charge. And generally, if you see something like this and you don't report it, you're just encouraging that to continue, and a member could be wiped out completely. Just very quickly, there was a situation that I was aware of a few years ago where a family member was taking money from an elderly aunt and using it for her own personal purposes. Well, the aunt was very happy to have this niece in her house to give her friendship and so forth, so she was just allowing her to spend whatever she wanted to spend. And finally, another family member came in and said, this isn't right, there's something going on here. And they were able to get in and stop the power of attorney that this lady had through some legal action. But it gets very convoluted when you get a lot of family members starting to say, well, this person is ripping my aunt off, this person is doing this, and this person is doing this. So it can be very complicated. But to answer the question directly, criminal charges could very well result if someone is significantly stealing from someone who can prove the case.
Great, thank you, Larry. And a follow-up to this would be, of the reported cases of elders abuse in Larimer County, how many are prosecuted? And of those prosecuted, how many lead to convictions? What are we really up against legally?
Well, I think that if we can get a case to the point where we can prove it, our conviction rate is pretty good. The question is obviously is can we get a case to the point where we can prove the case? Because a lot of times we have one just recently where this person was being a niece again, had a gambling problem. She had the power of attorney, and she was stealing from her aunt Well, before we could get the case to prosecution, the aunt died, and unfortunately it was a suicide. But all of a sudden we don't have the information we need in order to proceed with the case. Sometimes we can, but this shouldn't stop people from reporting, because sometimes we can put a case together even if we don't get the help from the victim because they have Alzheimer's or whatever. Because we can show if there's a pattern of behavior with this person that is grooming this person to give somebody else money. So even though the victim may not be able to testify, we can show through a pattern of activity that there is in fact a criminal activity going on. So just because you have a victim who's real elderly and perhaps confused or even has Alzheimer's doesn't necessarily mean we can't make the case. But once we get to that point where we can get all the information we need, we can prosecute it. Now, to say that, it is not easy. These are some of the most difficult cases to put together to the point where we can, in fact, go ahead and prosecute. So a lot of times we have to look for some alternative methods of stopping the bleeding, so to speak, and protect this person without the help of the criminal prosecution. But if we can find a way to do it, we're more than anxious and willing to pursue cases who are abusing our elderly.
Great, thank you, Larry. And there seems to be obviously a lot of interest around this. And another question along these lines for any of the panelists. What is the best course of action when an elder is being exploited by a family member or a caregiver and doesn't want to press charges?
That is our biggest roadblock at this point. I actually just came back from the National APS Conference, and they had an entire half day on working with people who are reluctant to engage in the legal system. And it is very difficult. And it's because, they are being, the perpetrator in these cases are family members, like Susan was saying, that they are just really, really hesitant. And so we try to intervene and engage other people in their lives that are more law-abiding, like the gentleman that Susan was talking about, to kind of, get things straightened out from here forward. It's very difficult, though, to get, the elders that we work with or the at-risk adults to move forward with a lot of those things. But it is funny because we have a gentleman that we've been working on and off with for about 4 years who we know that those grandkids have been taking him for every dime, and he has always been reluctant to do anything, and he called us about 2 months ago and said, I'm done. So we are now working with Fort Collins PD to move forward on that.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question, and that is, what is the most important piece of advice for us as concerned community members? Beau, thank you.
I'll start. That's a great question. I'm not sure that this is the right answer, but I do think that one really important thing that we can do as community members, and first of all, the fact that you're all here engaged right now is quite impressive. But I think the one thing that we can do, whether we're in a situation ourselves or whether we have parents who might be in that situation, is encourage open communication. I think it's incredibly important that we talk about this issue, try to bring it out of the shadows, try to alleviate some of the embarrassment and shame that come along with it, and have real, honest, candid conversations around the issues.
Thanks, Beau. Anyone else want to? Thank you, Susan.
I was very fortunate. My parents taught me a lot, and my mom is 99 years old. She's here. And she still is always teaching me new things. And one thing she taught me was patience, especially now, a lot of patience. But what I've learned with her, too, is that I've had to change and be open-minded and understanding. And I know that one of the things we'll be talking about is changing the culture concerning aging in our society. And, I thought about that before coming here tonight. And, I think really you need to understand about changing the atmosphere, changing the compassion and understanding and patience so that older people aren't intimidated in coming forward with what's going on in their lives, because you've heard us talk about it, that so often they keep it a secret because they're afraid of losing their independence by telling you that they've made a mistake. and they're so afraid that you're going to judge them because of what they've done, and they'll keep it a secret. So try to change that culture. And you know, when I was a kid, my parents told me, don't keep secrets. If something happens, please tell us. And now it's the other way around. Mom, if something happens, please tell me. And that's how it is. We've got to change that around because we're taking care of them. We're taking care of the older people now. So think about that as you deal with people that are older than you, so that they will come forward and they won't keep those secrets, and that they will be empowered.
Great. Well, we have a lot of great questions here, so we're going to do our best to gather this information and get it back out to those of you we have information on. So this concludes our panel and Q&A portion discussion. So in just a moment, we'll be taking a 15-minute break so that you'll be able to stretch, again, be able to visit the community resources table, and then return back to your tables at about 5 minutes after 6 so we can begin the intergenerational small group facilitated discussion. But let's give one more round of applause to our panelists.
And then the last thing we'll do, I'll set up a wall up here of easels. The last thing we're going to do, we're going to pass out a Post-it note and ask all of y'all to write down what's the most important thing you heard today. It might even have been something you said was the most important thing you heard today. We want you to write that down, and then we'll bring these all up, and we'll have a wall full of the most important thing everyone heard. That'll give you a chance at the end of the meeting to kind of watch that. We'll also type all of those up and then post them and send them on to people.
What was the issue that rose to the top at your table?
One of the main issues that rose to the top was that generations are changing. There's this anti-aging thing where people are just taught just to disagree with anti-aging with all the commercials for beauty products and all of that. And that was with approach 3 for the anti-aging part, was just to kind of change that out.
So one of the things that our table discussed, we had 3 different approaches. The first was on prevention of elder abuse. The second was on really making sure that we put in efforts to have people recognize and report elder abuse, because you know, it might happen whether our prevention efforts work or not. And then the third was really changing the culture of aging, which is something that Connor was discussing. And so one of the things that my table discussed was that changing the culture is really important and that we need to start now, but that won't necessarily change everything. It's not going to be a cure-all. So we really need to change the culture concurrently with these other methods, and that's kind of what our table got to. Casey?
And similarly to Shelby, our group just talked about how each of these approaches really need to work together. And while education is extremely important, we have to, the second one talks a lot about monitoring and reporting and making sure that there is a punishment that fits the crimes. And we have to make sure that everything kind of works together so that we can change the culture altogether.
I learned that respect is vital for this to all work out. People are feeling disrespected by younger generations, and that needs to change.
I think the biggest thing that I learned coming out of this forum is that it's not just physical abuse, that a lot of times it's emotional abuse or financial abuse, and it's actually coming from, the majority of it is coming from family members, and I think that that's an important thing to recognize.
And again, speaking to that point, a lot of people at my group talked about how victims are afraid to report because that's not something that we look up to in our communities. We make it a bad thing. There's a negative stigma around it. So if we can make it a positive thing to report, and also make sure they know that family member or whoever is committing the crime isn't necessarily going to go to jail, because a lot of people are afraid to report because it's a family member and they don't want to hurt that family member. But there's a lot of other things that can happen, such as, first of all, making the abuse stop. That's really where the important thing lies.
One thing that I would share is that my table was awesome. I sat next to a man that was very enlightening. Every time he said something, I just took it in, and I really wish I could have more time to just sit down and talk with him.
I think it's really important that we do forums like this. One of the things that we talked about is really having these intergenerational conversations, and I think that could really start with things like this. Work that the Center for Public Deliberation does, I think, is really important, and yeah.
And again, I would agree, my table reacted very positively to the conversation, and everyone was very appreciative of just being able to talk about these things, and that this is an open space to discuss those safely and find the resources they need to help them.
Connor, Shelby, Casey, thank you very much.
Thank you.